Decorex.
Hello, and a very warm welcome. I'm Jessica Johnson, co-founder of the online Homes and Interiors magazine, The Homepage, and I'm delighted to be joined today by three celebrated interior designers to discuss the importance of storytelling in design. Brian Woulfe, founder of Design by Woulfe, Shalini Misra and Laura Hammett each have their own individual styles, but are all talented storytellers. Please join me in giving them a very warm welcome. So first of all, what does storytelling mean to you as designers, and why does it matter? Who's going to go first?
I mean, I'm happy to go first. I thought this was a really interesting topic when I first heard about it because initially, as a design studio, our aesthetic is not particularly... initially, I didn't think that was a storytelling kind of aesthetic, but actually, when I thought more about it, it's so much about the client. And I think that's why I was really drawn to coming today and talking about it, because what we're very passionate about as a studio is getting to really understand the client and creating a home for them. We focus on residential, so we are all about the client at all times. Even when we're working with developers, it still has to have that narrative of who is going to live in it, even if we don't know them at that time. So I think there's that aspect of storytelling, which is, you know, expressing their personality, their history, but also who comes to visit them. But then I also think there's another side of it, which is about the kind of experience of a home, the experience of an interior, and how you move through a space from kind of front door right through to all the kind of private back of house areas.
And I think to add to what Laura said, we work primarily on residential projects as well. It's trying to bring the client's identity into the project. And one thing we try and leave our clients with is an ability to tell a story when they have friends or family visit, that they're able to relate the story or the design journey to those that visit, and where particular commissions came from, what inspired the commissions, why we decided to work with a particular artist or a craftsperson, and that gives them a narrative to that lasts forever, and it's nice for them to have that sort of connection to the property when we're long gone.
Something that makes it unmistakably their home. Yeah. Shalini.
Yeah, for me as well, because I think it's that idea, that concept, that thought, that's really important. So once you crack that concept, and that's with a lot of dialogue with the client and yourself, because you're creating a mood for them, in a way a lifestyle for them to enjoy the interiors. So once you crack that idea, concept, it then helps you build the story. And then that story helps we form the decision on what to choose, what type of furniture, what type of fabrics, what type of interior products to choose. So it just runs through the common theme of the project. Otherwise, you know, if there's not a strong storytelling, things can be quite mixed-matched and it doesn't really appear right.
Yeah.
So I think that dialogue between the client and ourselves is really important to establish the storytelling.
But how do you balance telling your client's story and their history with your own aesthetic, staying true to your own personal style?
I think it's fairly easy for our studio. We don't have an in-house style that we subscribe to. Our clients come for a tailor-made design solution, so we have the ability to be free in our design and in the inspiration we bring to the table at the start of a project. So getting to know the clients, understanding their cultural backgrounds, what passions they may have, that inspires their story. And for us, all of our projects is about our client's story and not about me imposing my design preferences or styles on them.
So for me, I think the clients spend a lot of time actually choosing me. So they've done their homework, they like our aesthetics, they like in some ways, the concept that we are bringing into the project. So we bring a lot of well-being in the project. So we have a lot of well-being formulas in it. And we do bespoke projects. So, you know, every project is very different from the other. And that's like you, Brian.
Yeah.
We establish the brief with the client. So for them, I think they already know somewhat what our style is, what our wellness principles that we bring in. So it's easy for us to enforce it into their lifestyles.
Yeah, and I'd say the same for us as well. I think people come to us now knowing what we do, knowing our aesthetic, and they've already chosen that. But I think, again, being so client-led, we are always kind of driving that aesthetic in different directions. We're working in lots of different countries, 11 different countries at the moment. So therefore, the client is always a very different personality, different culture, different histories. So therefore, the design is always going to be tailored to them. But I think we just bring our kind of design principles. There is probably a natural aesthetic, even more than we're aware as we're designing, that kind of follows through. So my husband and I, Aaron and I, are very hands-on with all projects. So therefore, our kind of design aesthetic, I think, is always evident in all of our projects. But we work collaboratively with the client as well. So they bring their design ideas to the table. They'll have lots of inspiration from other places before they've even come to us. So I think it's a combination of two things.
Laura, you mentioned earlier about storytelling not just being about the aesthetics, but also about that journey through a home, that actually it's almost like a home is telling a story. It's kind of, each room is almost sort of different chapters in a book. How do you each approach that, sort of making sure that there is that sense of flow, that it's part of a whole?
I mean, we work with the kind of shell of a building quite often with new builds, so we're working on the space planning as well. So that's a big aspect, is kind of, you've got the front door, how does that property reveal itself, where are you moving through, and really understanding kind of who the residents of the house are, understanding the ages of the children, and also we've got lots of clients who have multiple homes, so what is this house about for them, who are they spending time with in this house? And in what rooms, at what times, different times of the day. So I think once you've got all of that information from the brief, which is a big part of our process, is really spending a lot of quality time with the clients. Quite often, if we're going to another country to visit them, we'll stay with them and we'll really spend time with them that way. And then once you've gathered all that information, then quite often that kind of comes together naturally, because you're making the home very practical. I mean, that's the first thing for us to think about before aesthetics, is how that space is being used. But then it's the mood as well. And for me, design is so much about how a space feels. How it looks is obviously massively important, but that means nothing unless you feel good in it, or you feel that welcome, that homely feel. But equally, you can go into a space that feels formal, and that can be a very intentional a room that doesn't get used very often. And then you've got the family spaces, which is all about just comfort and everyone feeling like it's all of their, all of their space.
I think knowing the client and spending time getting to know the client at the beginning will not only help inform the space planning and an understanding of how each of the individual spaces are going to be used, but we'll often spend months just getting to know the client before we even embark on sort of delivering a concept to them.
That's amazing. Tell me more about that. How does that work?
Drinks, dinners, trips to galleries, museums, maybe visiting other residents that they have, whether it's in the UK or overseas, to understand what they do and don't like about the space planning, first and foremost, of the houses that they're living in, the functionality, what irks them, what they don't want to repeat, understanding what went wrong in processes with other designers or architects or contractors the last time, so again, it can be bettered on and improved on. That's part of the story as well, because at the end of the project, you want them to have a positive experience across the board. If something goes wrong with a third-party supplier or the design team or the architect, it sort of has a negative impact across their whole experience. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. Getting to know, for example, a client with particular age kids, that may determine the story the house is going to tell. If they're teenagers, there'll be media rooms, breakout spaces, places to get rid of the kids so that the parents and the grandparents can have their own space. If they're younger, maybe they want to keep them closer, so you have playrooms closer to the main living spaces, kids' bedrooms and nurseries closer to the principal bedrooms. That sort of helps direct the story that the house, the functionality the house is going to tell, and their cultural backgrounds. People from different backgrounds and different religions, it'll inform how the space needs to be designed, how things need to be orientated. A lot of that is done before a concept or a space planning is even presented to the client, and taking the time, especially when working with high-end luxury clients, they're investing into something that they want to hopefully live in or use for some time to come, and it's not just a spur of the moment fast interior that they're producing. it's a really important part of the storytelling and getting it right.
Shalini.
Yeah. So like what Brian and Laura have said, space planning is very important. I have 9 years of architectural background in which the volume, the spaces, how they relate to each other has been instilled in my brains, and of course the clients also help with their lifestyles. But also where the property belongs, that is really important. What is the property telling to us? What is the vernacular of that space around it? Like, I did this project in New York on a 38th floor of a building where the nature really spoke to me. So the sky outside, the colors that you saw outside, I just decided to bring that inside. So where the property belongs and how you react to what is in the surroundings helped me create the mood and the sensibilities of the interiors. So it was really like floating in the clouds. The colors were all like, the walls were lined with this blue-gray silk wallpaper. It was very small. It was a 2-bedroom, 2,000 square feet apartment. So I made everything like floating in off the ground and kept it quite very beautiful pieces, but kept it very light in spirit. So I think where it sits is also really important, along with the client's lifestyle, of course.
What do you think are the most impactful and effective ways to communicate your client's personality and tastes?
I love to use some of their own belongings, and actually, interestingly, the image that's on the wall is a client. They were a retired couple, and they bought this apartment in Holland Park, wanting to kind of downsize from their family home, and they'd done some incredible travelling and collected amazing artifacts across the world. So, for example, that piece there. And that was really nice to kind of blend those elements from their history, but with a more contemporary. They wanted it to feel like almost quite a youthful space, have that contrast. And that was really fun. And artwork definitely is a big part of that. So I think we'll, quite early on in the process while we're doing the briefing, is really understand what pieces do they already own that they want us to repurpose or place in the home. And that can really dictate the kind of the tone. Whether in this case we were doing a bit of a kind of contemporary architectural contrast to some of these more eclectic pieces, or other times it can really influence that aesthetic, and you lead from those pieces.
I think art and the client's travels are two of the major jumping off points for us in our projects. Sometimes clients have no past experience of art. They haven't been exposed to it. They've come from different backgrounds. They're maybe self-made. This is their first sort of dive into a luxury or high-end property refurbishment or development, and they look to us to sort of guide them as well. And we spend time at the galleries and the museums trying to understand what art do they gravitate towards, bringing on board art consultants to work with them, talking them through the process of building a collection that tells a story, or arranging artist meet and greets for them to speak to the artist to see, does the artist's story inspire a direction for the interiors? Do they have anything in common with the artist or the background behind the pieces? And when you start that helps to sort of add another layer and another dimension to the storytelling.
And that could potentially tie in with the vernacular of the location as well.
Yeah.
Would you say so, Shalini?
Yes, and this photograph that you see now, it's gone now, but this is another one. Basically, crafts is very important. Art is really important. Finding the right people to actually create the impact, working with artisans. I often find artists from the Royal Academy, fresh graduates, give them commissions of work to do. Finding lost, dying arts, giving them a contemporary life. So just finding interesting products, because it's that for impact you need like a wow factor. So to find something that's interesting, like here we've written, let's go get lost. It's a beautiful garden, and the idea is to slow down, to actually breathe, slow down, relax. So it's just what the art, what you see is relating to what you're wanting to create in the mood.
And in your own home, you selected British craftspeople and artists, didn't you?
Yes,
that's wonderful.
So I love marquetry, and it was surprisingly very difficult to find artisans who still did marquetry. And England was known for its good quality marquetry. So I found this really nice firm that did, and I wanted to create woodlands that were outside, bring that inside from my garden. So I had these huge cabinets which had beautiful marquetries of trees and birds and made out of mother of pearl and different veneers of wood. So just bringing crafts in, a lot of eglomized mirror, embedding art in the walls, just I love ceilings as canvases, so putting things on the ceilings is a lot of joy. So many different ways of creating impact.
Personalisation has become a real marker of luxury now. Can you tell us about any particular projects that you've each worked on where there's been a really special personal detail that you've included for the client and what that added to it?
We do a lot of bespoke work. Almost all of the furniture that we provide, and obviously the joinery and everything is bespoke. So there's a lot of opportunity to do something really personal that way. We've done some lovely things recently overseas. So, for example, a project we're working on at the moment in Cap d'Antibes, we're doing a really beautiful tapestry in the dining room, and the kind of graphic of that is taken from the local landscape. We've also done other touches where we're working with kind of a family emblem or something, but done in a very understated way. So making sure that they've got that kind of stamp of their family legacy, but done in a way that feels quite personal and discreet to them. So doing that, subtly in some kind of marble marquetry on the floor. So just lots of different touches, ways to bring that in.
Fabulous.
I've just launched an online shop called the Design Bars. It's here at the Decorex at E167 if you want to have a look. So we have a lot of suppliers there who do a lot of bespoke, personalized work, especially like textiles. So that's one very easy way to personalize something. But there was one really fun project I did in Kensington where we resourced and we did a lot of historical background search on 6 generations of that family. And we sent people to source a lot of, information on the family. And then we made 4 panels by this company called Based Upon. And on these 4 panels, all the historical information, where they lived, their favorite books, any favorite quotations, articrafts, it was a metal relief work, so it was all put on those panels. And then those panels, I feel, will go down history because it's so personal. And also it was a lot of research that went into putting information on those panels.
That sounds absolutely incredible. And are those things that would be able to come with them if they were to move, or
yes,
are they
yes,
they are integral
exactly.
to the?
So that's why we made it into separate panels, so that if one child wants one panel to keep, then they could as well. So we made it into a size which would be easy to carry for generations to come.
Fantastic.
I hope they do.
Yes, amazing. Brian?
I think we're very fortunate. We will work on big commissions and high-value projects, and so that's where we've ended up. But some of the more noteworthy or the more memorable crafts pieces, the bespoke elements can often be the smallest. One particular one that comes to mind is a project we completed in Notting Hill. A young American couple with twin boys, and the father travels and likes to bring the kids traveling with them. And he had a shoebox full of postcards that he would write. Every time they traveled somewhere together, he'd buy a postcard and write a postcard to the twin boys saying, this is what we did on the trip. This is how your personality had changed, or something was memorable to me, and had been storing them all. So we had a pair of handcrafted wooden boxes with wood sourced locally to where they had come from, lined with leather. There was the boys' names were engraved into the top of the boxes. And then there was a quote from their father on the inside. And it was just, it sits on a shelf. It's high enough up so the twin boys don't sort of pull them apart. But it's something he can then give to the boys in the future. And everybody asks when they go into the drawing room, oh, what are those boxes? And they can pull them out and they can read the postcards. And we have wax paper between all of the postcards so that we protect the ink on them. And it's small details like that, I guess, that define interiors and then luxury interiors, because you don't get that budget for that level of customization or bespoke or working with craftspeople like that.
And it's bringing that really human element into
and parts
design.
of the storytelling again.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. I love that idea. So I guess when you're looking at storytelling in design, when you're working with a private client on their home, you can sort of see that there would be, you know, those good sort of starting jumping off points that you were talking about. But if you're working on, you know, with a property developer or on a hotel, how do you introduce storytelling then?
I think it's still very, very important. I think we've kind of moved on from the days where people want to, when they're doing viewings, they get so tired of seeing the same thing. So I think you have to make property developments feel quite unique. You need to be able to walk in and picture yourself living there. So I think the challenge is always making sure that you're not alienating certain buyers, but that you're making it feel like a real home and it's got a sense of identity. And actually, I think there might be a slide at some point coming up with a development we did that was a listed building, and we took the door knocker, which was a fish, I think, and we restored it, polished it up, and we used it as a paperweight in the study. So with all of our developments, we always do the turnkey furnishing. So you've already got that kind of lifestyle element in there. But I think having those little touches, you're kind of reflecting the history of the building. So you're maybe talking more about the building story, probably more so than the imagined buyer. But having said that, we've done a lot of developments where we're doing a children's bedroom, for example. We're doing a lovely one in Holland Park, number 80 Holland Park at the moment, which is a lovely development. And, you know, we're kind of almost making a decision about who those potential rooms might be used for. Whether they are or not is almost irrelevant. You're telling that story. You're kind of describing how that home could feel. And we've got a very fun kind of young boys room, which is coming together this week, actually. So there's lots of different ways you can still do that with a development, I think.
And I think any of the brands that you would be working with, whether the developers or commercial F&B establishments, they have a brand and they have an identity. So trying to understand where that brand has come from, how it's gotten to where it is now, where they're looking to go, and then telling that story in the projects is really important.
And I suppose there's an imagined story that's yet to be told as well, that's going to happen in that space. So is that part of it as well, would you say?
Yeah, for me, it's the location. It's the location's important. So I did one in Mayfair, and I took inspiration from Mayfair itself, the village quality of Mayfair, the galleries it has, the fashion shops it has, and I brought all that glamour into the apartment and took historical references as well, created patterns which were historical, which belonged to Mayfair. So I brought Mayfair living into the apartment. And there's one which I'm doing, which it's a massive block of flats, and it faces all the flats. Half of the flats face Hyde Park. So I'm taking a lot of inspiration from biophilic design, which is the connection with nature. So bringing a lot of nature, bringing a lot of those colors inside the apartment, so that highlights the views, that highlights what you're going to see. So yeah, I think it's nice. It's important to give some character and to have some unison, to have some storytelling in the developments as well.
And each of you has a strong international client base. How do you find that affects the outcome of the homes and projects that you complete?
I mean, I think it's got a huge part of it. I think we'd all agree to that, because you're bringing in the history and culture of that particular location. So I think we're hired as a British designer, and people want an element of that aesthetic. There's no question of that. But equally, it needs to feel like it's located in that place. Otherwise, it just feels like it's inauthentic. So, for example, we've got a lot of projects with clients we've done multiple homes for in different countries. So they want to feel like when they're in that country, you know you're in that country. So I think it really dictates every aspect of the design. But it's also so much about how they feel when they're in that country. So whether it's their home country or not, it might be their holiday home, in which case you walk in the door and it's a holiday vibe. It's a completely different aesthetic, different in every sense, practicality, everything. Whereas when it's their main home, let's say back in the UK, the design brief is completely different.
I think another layer to that, being privileged enough to work internationally, it brings a lot to the projects you do back home as well, because you are, while you're there, discovering new artisans, new craftspeople, new elements of culture that helps inspire stories you tell elsewhere. So we will turn to craftspeople we have met on other design journeys elsewhere, and that will help inspire the furnishings or where we have things manufactured or created. And that's a really nice layer as well, because it's part of the overall story of our clients, because they've hired a designer with international experience, and we bring that to the table, and that's something that we can inject into their interiors.
That's lovely.
For me, it's I have a very international background. I grew up in India. I didn't have a passport till I was 24. I went to America, lived there, went to college there, had my first child there, worked there, then have been in London for the last 25 years. So when the clients try to source me, I think it's because of this international background I have. And I think they consider me as a European designer. I have a lot of projects in America, and they love Europe. They like the history, so they enjoy the fact that I'm based in Europe, and I can resource a lot of things for them from here. So it's I think it's interesting how people find you, and it's mainly because I think you're based internationally.
It's interesting. What advice would you all give to both to designers and also to those who are looking to appoint a designer, and they're wanting to bring a high level of personalization to a project?
Go.
I would say the relationship with the designer is everything, really. I always say that kind of, we choose our clients as much as they choose us. So I would say we spend a bit of time at the beginning just having a more generalized conversation about how the process works, how we like to work, how they expect it to work with a designer, even before we've got to the briefing. So I think really making sure that you have a real connection with your designer, or vice versa with your client. You have to enjoy the process because it is very personal. You get to know, I think we'd all agree, you get to know your clients surprisingly well sometimes. And that's really important. You have to enjoy the process, and you have to listen to them. You have to really hear what they want from you. And like I said, go back to how they want the home to feel. So I think that, that dialogue's got to be really strong both ways.
I think for me, communication is key at the start. Spending time communicating and getting to know each other before you start discussing contracts or the brief or the space planning. Knowing when a client is not the right fit for your studio is as important as them knowing whether you're the right fit, because otherwise it's going to be a battle the whole way through the project. So being mature enough to say, I don't think I'm the right designer for you, and sort of maybe guiding them in another direction and saying, we'll on occasion have said, I think, designer X might be a better fit, not because there's any difference in the level of service, but because maybe their personality is a better fit. For me, personality is everything. I look through my WhatsApp groups, I'll have very batty and off-the-wall group names for my various client communications, some of them marriage counselors, some of them things I can't even mention. But that sort of, it helps break down the boundaries and sort of make them comfortable to communicate certain. We need to know how they use the house for real, not how they use it when showing or entertaining. So communication is really important, and if they're not willing to open up, then they're not going to get the story that they want or the narrative that they want.
Yeah, I agree with them. I think I personally have done 3 homes for myself, and I think I've been the worst client and the worst interior designer. It's been a nightmare experience. So what I would tell the clients is there's enough research out there for every designer. There's so much online, you can establish, and then having a dialogue to see whether you get along with that person. Because I think if you look at the cost, pretty much every designer charges the same, so there's not that much difference in the costings. But it's really establishing a relationship, whether you'll get along with that person, whether they create bespoke pieces, whether they have a certain style that you like, what will they bring forward to you. It's a daunting process. It's not an easy process because there is so much competition out there as well. So good luck to them.
And finally, what stories do your own homes tell about you?
That I've got 2 very messy children, probably. Actually, our own home is a lot more laid back and kind of, relaxed, I think, than our clients' homes, partly because our budget just doesn't allow much beyond that. But also, we do have 2 kids, We like to entertain a lot in a very informal way. So I think our home is about comfort. You know, most of all, I like to be tidy, so I think that's a big part of it. You know, designing, storage everywhere. But I think for us it's just big. We're quite informal people, so I think that's reflected in kind of tone of our home.
Lovely. Brian?
Art is I don't think there's any negative wall space left on the current apartment. I'm about to embark on a new journey, and I'm dreading being my own designer and client at the same time, and that it's very dog friendly. I think every surface for me needs to be washable, wipeable. I have two very big and boisterous dogs. So.
Fantastic.
For me, it's still an evolving journey in my homes. I collect a lot of art for so many years. I love crafts, so really special pieces, really beautiful pieces, and just very comfortable. And that feeling of being happy, feeling well in your home is very important. Everything should be really like inviting, welcoming, you know, really pleasant. So I think all these ingredients.
That's fantastic. We've got some time now for some audience questions. Does anybody have any questions for our panel? Come on, don't be shy. Anyone? No? Okay. So, I mean, if we were to kind of go back to thinking about storytelling, you know, when we're thinking about designers. So, Laura, you were saying at the beginning that it wasn't something necessarily that you'd thought of that you do as a practice, but
Yeah.
on reflection.
I think so, because I think we're not, you know, we're quite a kind of, how do I describe it? I mean, we're not a cutting edge design studio, you know, we design homes, so they're very kind of livable homes, but obviously to a kind of high level. But you know, we don't use a huge amount of colour. We're not big on patterns. So I think initially I thought maybe that's not what we do, but actually it's absolutely what we do. And the more I kind of delved into it, I realised that, you know, this kind of idea of storytelling just has so many different aspects to it. And I think, you know, you touched really nicely on the architecture. We're doing a lot of listed buildings. We're doing a grade 1 listed building in London, which is amazing, and the history in that building is just unbelievable. And it's also been used for a lot of film sets, so we're doing some lovely imagery in the cinema of you know, stills from the movies that have been filmed there. So there's so many different ways to tell a story. I just think it's a really interesting subject.
Fantastic. And Brian, I love what you were saying earlier about you know, your different WhatsApp groups, and that there's an element of having to be a marriage counsellor.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that when you are dealing with couples and maybe they've actually got quite different stories that they want their homes to tell. I mean, how do you navigate that as designers?
I think it's easier if they have the same cultural background. If it's a mixed cultural background, it immediately is a challenge on day one, because they have very different elements that have inspired them in their lives and their family makeup, and so what they learned was how they learned the house ran at home will be very different. Simple things like whether shoes are on or shoes are off, shoes on, shoes off. That's something a lot of clients haven't, if they're getting married and they haven't spoken about it before, if they haven't lived together before, when you go through those little basic elements, that can be quite tedious. Agreeing who's getting the most wardrobe space, if there's limited wardrobe space. Agreeing whether or not we need 1 or 2 principal ensuite bathrooms.
Yeah.
Husband assumes it's only 1, all of a sudden you're building the house, it has to be 2. Cultural background, I think, is the first thing that causes a lot of conflict. And then it's whoever's managing the budget. So you'll have somebody else saying, no, we absolutely do not want to spend on bespoke joinery and bespoke pieces of furniture, and then there's somebody else driving it saying, yes, we absolutely do. And it's where we find the storytelling comes into itself is the person who maybe didn't want to go on that journey on commissioning stuff, getting them involved in that journey, helping them understand why something costs what it does, bringing them to studios, to galleries, feeling and touching it, bringing them to meet the craftspeople or the artists will help them understand, okay, this isn't something that's fast interiors that you buy online. Somebody has actually painstakingly designed it, been inspired, created it, and it's a one-off or one of a small run or a small collection. So that sort of rectifies that issue as well.
That's great. How about the two of you? Have you got any advice for other designers in this situation?
There's a kind of, we do it's a questionnaire that we do with our briefing process. Usually it's more of an informal conversation, and those are just kind of pointers. But what's worked for us quite well is we actually send that to the clients, but in advance. Because I think, like you said, Brian, there's quite a lot of topics that come up that they haven't even thought of. It hasn't occurred to them that they may not agree on something quite fundamental that's going to affect the design. So rather than kind of putting them too much on the spot in a meeting, I mean, we've had some meetings where, you know, it's definitely, there's some contentious points, and we've kind of left them to it for a bit, or said, let's come back to that. But giving them a bit of a heads up so they can start to think through is quite good. But it's, yeah, I mean, also I run the company with my husband, so we kind of bring two sides to, you know, two sides of the design process to the table. So we tend to kind of identify a little bit more with each client. So that helps to kind of add to that conversation.
And anticipating what those potential flashpoints might be.
Exactly, because we all have them.
Yeah, I think a questionnaire is what we do as well. And, you know, things like what colors they like, whether they like neutrals, whether they like high impact colors in certain areas, especially bedrooms, you know, whether you want TV or not, that's always an issue. The husband always wants a TV, the wife doesn't want a TV. So we look into different types of moods that we are creating. What type of light? Do you like white light, daylight? Do you like the warm colors of light? So we thrash through a lot of questions. We go through a lot of information with them, and that helps in decision making.
I think one other point to make is be prepared to make a decision or offer up a suggestion. You'll get these conflict moments in meetings and on site where they're not agreeing. Have a voice. They're paying you to have a voice. Offer up an opinion. It's not like you're picking one side over the other, or try and find a halfway middle ground. Otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere. So as long as you can appear to be the voice of reason and help move past the block, it sort of goes back on track. But don't sit there and just go, okay.
I always get that. Yeah. What do you think? What would you do in that situation? I always get that from the clients. So you just, and also having done so many projects over the last 25 years, you also have a firm belief in this would be right, that would be wrong. So you guide
if it was
them.
me, I would do
this.
But it's up to you.
Yes, that's great advice. Excellent. Thank you all so much for your fantastic answers, and thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.